Hello guys, what's up buttercups? Welcome back to Lilly Code, 100 Days of Code, and we are on day 52 today. So absolutely fantastic. Yesterday I was just looking at Kubernetes and had a few errors running it. So, I just watched the video. So I actually just want to continue watching this, get through it. It's taken me forever and then get back to the other stuff I was doing. So let's just watch this together. This is what I'm studying today. It may not be very interesting, but sure, look, it's what I'm doing, and hopefully it is interesting. So, and always a bit of waffle with me as well, but I'll keep that to a minimum and let's get into it. So, thanks for joining me, guys. Here we go.
How to create components in a namespace. In the last example, we've created components using configuration files, and nowhere there we have defined a namespace. So what happens is, by default, if you don't provide a namespace to a component, it creates them in a default namespace. So if I apply this config map component, and let's do that actually right now. So kubectl apply -f config map. If I apply that and I do kubectl get config map, my config map was created in a default namespace. And notice that even in the kubectl get config map command, I didn't use a namespace, because kubectl get or kubectl commands, they take the default namespace as a default. So kubectl get config map is actually same as kubectl get config map -n or namespace and default namespace. So these are the same commands, it's just a shortcut because it takes default as a default namespace. Okay.
Guys, I figured something else out which is also helpful because I didn't know how to do this, so that means other people probably don't as well. Same situation, we're all learning here. So if you hold down shift on your keyboard, if you keep the shift button clicked down and then you right click on your folder, you can open it with your PowerShell. So I don't know why that option just isn't there, but it's not. So in order to open your PowerShell, which is what Nana is looking at here, she's, running commands in her PowerShell. So we'll try and run these as well. We have our command shell here that we can do that with. But I'm not expecting these to work because we got lost somewhere along the way. But I just want to keep going. So anyway, just to show you that real quick, and we'll keep going. So thanks.
So one way that I can create this config map in a specific namespace is using kubectl apply command, but adding flag namespace and the namespace name. So this will create config map in my namespace. And this is one way to do it. Another way is inside the configuration file itself. So I can adjust this config map configuration file to include the information about the destination namespace itself. So in the metadata, I can add a namespace attribute. So if I apply this configuration file again using kubectl apply, and now if I want to get the component that I created in this specific namespace, then I have to add the option or the flag to kubectl get command, because as I said, by default, it will check only in the default namespace. So I recommend using the namespace attribute in a configuration file instead of providing it to the kubectl command, because one, it's better documented, so you know by just looking at the configuration file where the component is getting created, because that could be an important information. And second, if you're using automated deployment where you're just applying the configuration files, then again, this will be a more convenient way to do it. Now, if, for example, we take a scenario where one team gets their own namespace and they has to work entirely in that namespace, it could be pretty annoying to have to add this namespace tag to every kubectl command. So in order to make it more convenient, there is a way to change this default or active namespace, which is default namespace, to whatever namespace you choose. And Kubernetes or kubectl doesn't have any out-of-the-box solution for that, but there's a tool called kubens or kubens, and you have to install the tool. So on Mac, so I'm going to execute brew install kubectx. So this will install kubens tool as well.
Okay guys, so we don't have brew, we have chocolatey. So let's try and install this with chocolatey. So I'm just going to run the same command. Let's see if it works. With chocolatey. What was the command? I don't know. going too fast.
and
Gotta
it has
go
to
slow.
work entirely in that namespace. It could be pretty annoying to have to add this namespace tag to every kubectl command. So in order to make it more convenient, there is a way to change this default or active namespace, which is default namespace, to whatever namespace you choose. And Kubernetes or kubectl doesn't have any out-of-the-box solution for that, but there's a tool called kubeNS or kubeNS, and you have to install that tool. So on Mac, so I'm gonna execute brew install kubectx.
So just brew install kubectx. So let's try that. Instead we will use Choco, because we have Choco package manager. Install kubectx. Okay. We're not running from an elevated command shell. We need administrative rights. Run it as administrator. Okay, that's fine. So we'll come back to down here. We'll go and we'll go to our PowerShell. Da, 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 da. Okay, so we'll run this as an admin, and this is our PowerShell. I'll just select yes here. And now we have our PowerShell, which we also learned how to scroll in here. Very exciting stuff, guys. We're learning so much more than coding. Zooming all over the place. So now we have our terminal down here. Hilarious. I don't know, I find it funny anyway. I laugh at silly things. So now we have our terminal down here. Let's just try and install it here. Like, I feel like I should be in my folder, but I don't even know how to navigate around in my folders from here. So look, we'll just give it a go. So Choco install. Maybe it can be global. This is just putting it global anyway. Install kubectx. Ooh, 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 ooh. Cool. So that's after working, which we love to see. And I'll get rid of that one. And now, so we just see here the package wants to run this install. If you don't want to run this script, the installation will fail. To confirm, just pass the flag Y. So we can just say Y, yes, cool, go ahead. Do your thing, chocolatey. I'd actually love some chocolate now. So now that's installing. And we'll just let that go. So perfect, it's installed the package, and we'll keep on watching Nana. So let's keep on watching Nana. And I'll just move this on down around the town. Okay.
So this will install kubeNS tool as well. So once I have the kubeNS installed, I can just execute kubeNS command. And this will give me a list of all the namespaces and highlight the one that is active, which is default right now. And if I want to change the active namespace, I can do kubeNS my namespace. And this will switch the active namespace. So if I do kubeNS now, I see that active one is my namespace. So now I can.
So maybe now it comes down to the fact that we are not in the correct folder, because it just can't find like any files here, which makes sense because we're just running this not from the desired location really. So now if we come to our documents, YouTube, Kubernetes, Kubernetes, and then we are in our Mongo Kubernetes folder here, and then if I hold down Shift, open PowerShell here, let's do that. So now we have our PowerShell, our terminal, opened up within the correct folder. Why you going missing on me now? So there we go. If you want to like have a new line, like just cancel whatever you're doing and come back to where you left off, the folder that you're currently in, you just do ctrl and C, and that gives you your new line then. So that's all I'm doing there, if anybody was wondering. And then from in here, what we're going to do is try and run kubeNS, which hopefully now, all right, don't know, do I? Okay, so let's just keep on watching. We haven't been, as I said, following along perfectly with this the last while, so we don't have a namespace and stuff set up because I couldn't get the Mongo secret file created. So let's just continue and watch and just get this knowledge in, and sure, look, we can build a proper Kubernetes project another day. I just want to get the basics down for now. So it was going great in the beginning, and then it all went downhill. But sure, look, what can you do, you know? No need to worry. So we'll just continue on.
Can execute kubectl commands without providing my namespace. But obviously, if you switch a lot between the namespaces, this will not be so much convenient. For your own operating system and environment, there will be a different installation process. So I'm going to link the kubectx installation guide in the description below. So in this video, we're going to talk about what Ingress is and how you should use it, and also what are the different use cases for Ingress. So first of all, let's imagine a simple Kubernetes cluster where we have a pod of my application and its corresponding service, my app service. So the first thing you need for a UI application is to be accessible through browser, right? So for external requests to be able to reach your application. So one way to do that, an easy way, is through an external service where basically you can access the application using HTTP protocol, the IP address of the node and the port. However, this is good for test cases and if you want to try something very fast, but this is not what the final product should look like. The final product should be like this. So you have a domain name for your application and you want a secure connection using HTTPS. So the way to do that is using Kubernetes component called Ingress. So you'll have a my app Ingress, and instead of external service, you would instead have an internal service. So you would not open your application through the IP address and the port. And now if the request comes from the browser, it's going to first reach the Ingress, and Ingress then will redirect it to the internal service, and then it will eventually end up with the pod. So now let's actually take a look and see how external service configuration looks like so that you have a practical understanding. So you have the service, which is of type load balancer. This means we are opening it to public by assigning an external IP address to the service. And this is the port number that user can access the application at. So basically, the IP address, the external IP address, and the port number that you specify here. Now with Ingress, of course, it looks differently. So let's go through the syntax of Ingress. Basically, you have a kind Ingress instead of a service, and in the specification where the whole configuration happens, you have so-called rules or routing rules. And this basically defines that the domain address or all the requests to that host must be forwarded to an internal service. So this is the host that user will enter in the browser, and in Ingress you just define a mapping. So what happens when that request to that host gets issued, you redirect it internally to a service. The path here basically means the URL path. So everything after the domain name, so / whatever path comes after that, you can define those rules here. And we'll see some different examples of the path configuration later. And as you see here in this configuration, we have a HTTP protocol. So later in this video, I'm going to show you how to configure HTTPS connection using Ingress component. So right now in the specification, we don't have anything configured for the secure connection. It's just HTTP. And one thing to note here is that this HTTP attribute here does not correspond to this one here. This is a protocol that the incoming request gets forwarded to the internal service. So this is actually the second step, and not to confuse it with this one. And now let's see how the internal service to that Ingress will look like. So basically, Backend is the target where the incoming request will be redirected, and the service name should correspond to the internal service name like this, and the port should be the internal service port. And as you see here, the only difference between the external and internal services is that here in internal service, I don't have the third port, which is the node port starting from 30,000. We don't have that attribute here, and the type is a default type, not a load balancer, but internal service type, which is cluster IP. So this should be a valid domain address. So you can't just write anything here. It has to be, first of all, valid, and you should map that domain name to IP address of the node that represents an entry point to your Kubernetes cluster. So for example, if you decide that one of the nodes inside the Kubernetes cluster is going to be the entry point, then you should map this to the IP address of that node. Or, and we will see that later, if you configure a server outside of the Kubernetes cluster that will become the entry point to your Kubernetes cluster, then you should map this host name to the IP address of that server. So now that we saw what Kubernetes Ingress components looks like, let's see how to actually configure Ingress in the cluster. So remember this diagram I showed you at the beginning? So basically you have a pod, service, and corresponding Ingress. Now, if you create that Ingress component alone, that won't be enough for Ingress routing rules to work. What you need in addition is an implementation for Ingress, and that implementation is called Ingress Controller. So the step one will be to install an Ingress Controller, which is basically another pod or another set of pods that run on your node in your Kubernetes cluster and does evaluation and processing of Ingress rules. So the YAML file that I showed you with the Ingress component is basically this part right here, and this has to be additionally installed in Kubernetes cluster. So what is Ingress Controller exactly? The function of Ingress Controller is to evaluate all the rules that you have defined in your cluster, and this way to manage all the redirections. So basically, this will be the entry point in the cluster for all the requests to that domain or subdomain rules that you've configured. And this will evaluate all the rules because you may have 50 rules or 50 Ingress components created in your cluster. It will evaluate all the rules and decide based on that which forwarding rule applies for that specific request. So in order to install this implementation of Ingress in your cluster, you have to decide which one of many different third-party implementations you want to choose from. I'll put a link of the whole list in the description where you see different kinds of Ingress controllers you can choose from. There is one from Kubernetes itself, which is Kubernetes Nginx Ingress controller, but there are others as well. So once you install Ingress controller in your cluster, you're good to go, create Ingress roles, and the whole configuration is going to work. So now that I've shown you how Ingress can be used in a Kubernetes cluster, there is one thing that I think is important to understand in terms of setting up the whole cluster to be able to receive external requests. Now, first of all, you have to consider the environment where your Kubernetes cluster is running. If you are using some cloud service provider, like Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Linode, there are a couple more, that have out-of-the-box Kubernetes solutions, or they have their own virtualized load balancers, etc., your cluster configuration would look something like this. So you would have a cloud load balancer that is specifically implemented by that cloud provider. And external requests coming from the browser will first hit the load balancer, and that load balancer then will redirect the request to Ingress Controller. Now, this is not the only way to do it. Even in cloud environment, you can do it in a couple of different ways, but this is one of the most common strategies. And advantage of using cloud provider for that is that you don't have to implement a load balancer yourself. So with minimal effort, probably on most cloud providers, you will have the load balancer up and running and ready to receive those requests and forward those requests then to your Kubernetes cluster. So very easy setup. Now, if you're deploying your Kubernetes cluster on a bare metal environment, then you would have to do that part yourself. So basically, you would have to configure some kind of entry point to your Kubernetes cluster yourself. And there's a whole list of different ways to do that, and I'm going to put that also in the description. But generally speaking, either inside of a cluster or outside as a separate server, you will have to provide an entry point. And one of those types is an external proxy server, which can be a software or hardware solution that will take a role of that load balancer and entry point to your cluster. So basically what this would mean is that you will have a separate server and you would give this a public IP address and you would open the ports in order for the requests to be accepted. And this proxy server then will act as an entry point to your cluster. So this will be the only one accessible externally. So none of the servers in your Kubernetes cluster will have publicly accessible IP address, which is obviously a very good security practice. So all the requests will enter the proxy server, and that will then redirect the request to Ingress Controller. And Ingress Controller will then decide which Ingress rule applies to that specific request. And the whole internal request forwarding will happen. So as I said, there are different ways to configure that and to set it up depending on which environment you are and also which approach you choose. But I think it's a very important concept to understand how the whole cluster setup works. So in my case, since I'm using Minikube to demonstrate all this on my laptop, the setup will be pretty easy. And even though this might not apply exactly to your cluster setting, still you will see in practice how all these things work. So the first thing is to install Ingress Controller in Minikube. And the way to do that is by executing Minikube add-ons enable Ingress. So what this does is automatically configures or automatically starts the Kubernetes Nginx implementation of Ingress Controller. So that's one of the many third-party implementations which you can also safely use in production environments, not just Minikube, but this is what Minikube actually offers you out of the box. So with one simple command, Ingress Controller will be configured in your cluster. And if you do kubectl get pod in a kube system namespace, you will see the Nginx Ingress Controller pod running in.
Okay guys, so I don't expect this to work, you know, because we've been trying to use this Cubans and, you know, we're not getting great results, but let's just give it a whirl, you know, you never know. So Minikube, add-ons, enable, oh, this is Ingress actually, so we might be okay. This is a different thing. Oh baby, oh baby, do you know what that's worth? Can't sing, guys. Don't judge me on my singing. Don't even judge me on my coding. Don't judge me on anything. Just here to learn. So yeah, that's about it. So we'll just continue here and see. Look, it's going ahead there. So that's great. I'll just watch Nana and let that run. So super.
Your cluster. So once I have Ingress controller installed, now I can create an Ingress rule that the controller can evaluate. So let's actually head over to the command line where I'm going to create Ingress rule for Kubernetes dashboard component. So in my Minikube cluster, I have Kubernetes dashboard, which is right now not accessible externally. So what I'm going to do is, since I already have internal service for Kubernetes dashboard and a pod, for that, I'm going to configure an Ingress rule for the dashboard, so I can access it from a browser using some domain name. So this shows me all the components that I have in Kubernetes dashboard. And since I already have internal service for Kubernetes dashboard and the pod that's running, I can now create an Ingress rule in order to access the Kubernetes dashboard using some host name. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create an Ingress for Kubernetes dashboard. So these are just metadata. The name is going to be dashboard Ingress, and the namespace is going to be in the same namespace as the service and pod. So in the specification, we are going to define the rules. So the first rule is the host name. I'm going to define dashboard.com. And the HTTP forwarding to internal service path, let's leave it at all path. And this is the backend of the service. So service name will be what we saw here. So this is the service name. And service port is where the service listens. So this is actually 80 right here. And this will be it. That's the Ingress configuration for forwarding every request that is directed to dashboard.com to internal Kubernetes dashboard service. And we know it's internal because its type is cluster IP, so no external IP address. So obviously, I just made up host name dashboard.com. It's not registered anywhere, and I also didn't configure anywhere which IP address this host name should resolve to. And this is something that you will always have to configure. So first of all, let's actually create that Ingress rule. So kubectl apply, and it's called dashboard Ingress YAML. See, Ingress was created. So if I do get Ingress in the namespace, I should see my Ingress here. And
so guys, why not? Let's give this a whirl. Do you know what I mean? We'll have a go here. So everything was falling over on me. Don't know how to go. So let's just see. So let's just make this file. You know, now I don't have high hopes. I've been saying this whole time, oh, I'm hopeful. And things like nothing, then it just all fell to pieces. Things weren't working, but that's fine. You know, some days things work, other days they don't. So we're just going to create a new file here and give this a whirl, because why not? So I'm going to copy out what she has here. So I'll actually just copy this for a bit of a template. So our API version is going to be networking .kubernetes k8s.io. Very catchy, isn't it? K8s Kubernetes, so cool. Beta 1. And then our kind, so this was originally for our secret file, which this is where we were falling over. I couldn't get it to create. It was all over the shop. So, but now we are instead, this is a kind, we're setting up our new file here for our Ingress type of file or kind of file. So then our name is going to be dashboard Ingress, board Ingress, and then we have a namespace. So for safety now, I'll just get rid of the rest because we know that indentation is extremely important in our YAML files, and you know, we just want to be careful now. So Kubernetes, to give us the best chance of actually getting this to work, dashboard, and who knows, maybe I'm hopeful again. Why not be hopeful, you know? Yeah, you might as well. So rules, colon, and then we have our our hyphen host dashboard.com. Then we'll have our HTTP indent, very important, paths indent, backend, straight underneath hyphen backend, dot, we will indent service name. Oh, we don't have this running, don't we not? So that's why it's not going to work yet. But anyway, let's just give it a whirl. You never know, we might get an error that actually gives me a bit more insight as to what is going wrong in the beginning. So let's just watch for a moment.
Is where the service listens. So this is actually 80 right here. And this will be it. That's the Ingress configuration for forwarding every request that is directed to dashboard.com to internal Kubernetes dashboard service. And we know it's internal because its type is cluster IP. So no external IP address. So obviously I just made up host name dashboard.com. It's not registered anywhere, and I also didn't configure anywhere which IP address this host name should resolve to. And this is something that you will always have to configure. So first of all, let's actually create that ingress rule. So kubectl apply, and it's called dashboard ingress.
Okay, so let's give this a go as well. So that's after doing something there. Great. Exiting due to our file add-on, waiting for app.kubernetes ingress, timed out waiting for the condition. So it was waiting for something which I wasn't aware of. Okay, let's just go and try what she's doing now. So kubectl apply, this is to apply or, you know, get these files, the files that we're creating, to actually do something with them. So, ooh baby, let's see.
YAML. See, ingress was created. So if I do get ingress in the namespace.
So we have the same error I've been seeing this whole time, which is fine. But yes, I know once I come to do this for real, you know, I probably won't have that error because I'll be following the documentation and there's just something small I've missed and I spent too long trying to figure it out. So in the interest of not wrecking my own head and probably wrecking your head too, we're just watching the video, so let's keep watching.
I should see my ingress here. And as you see, address is now empty because it takes a little bit of time to assign the address to ingress. So we'll have to wait for that to get the IP address that will map to this host. So I'm just gonna watch this, and I see that address was assigned. So what I'm gonna do now is that I'm gonna take that address, and in my etc hosts file, I see that address was assigned. So what I'm gonna do now is that I'm gonna take that address, and in my etc hosts file, at the end, I'm gonna define that mapping. So that IP address will be mapped to dashboard.com. And again, this works locally. If I'm gonna type dashboard.com in the browser, this will be the IP address that it's gonna be mapped to. Which basically means that the request will come into my Minikube cluster, will be handed over to Ingress controller, and Ingress controller then will go and evaluate this rule that I've defined here and forward that request to the service. So this is all the configuration we need. So now I'm gonna go and enter dashboard.com, and I will see my Kubernetes dashboard here. So Ingress also has something called a default backend. So if I do kubectl describe ingress, the name of the ingress and the namespace, I'll get this output. And here there's an attribute called default backend that maps to default HTTP backend port 80. So what this means is that whenever a request comes into the Kubernetes cluster that is not mapped to any backend, so there's no rule for mapping that request to a service, then this default backend is used to handle that request. So obviously, if you don't have this service in your cluster, Kubernetes will try to forward it to the service, it won't find it, and you would get some default error response. So for example, obviously, if you don't have this service created or defined in your cluster, Kubernetes will try to forward it to the service, it won't find it, and you would get some default error response. So for example, if I entered some path that I haven't configured, I just get page not found. So a good usage for that is to define custom error messages when a page isn't found, when a request comes in that you can't handle or the application can handle, so that the user still sees some meaningful error message or just a custom page where you can redirect them to your homepage or something like this. So all you have to do is create an internal service with the same name, so default HTTP backend, and the port number, and also create a pod or application that sends that custom error message response. So till now, I have shown you what Ingress is and how you can use it. I've also shown you a demo of how to create an Ingress rule in Minikube, but we've used only a very basic Ingress YAML configuration, just a simple forwarding to one internal service with one path. But you can do much more with Ingress configuration than just basic forwarding. And in the next section, we're going to go through more use cases of how you can define more fine granular routing for applications inside a Kubernetes cluster. So the first thing is defining multiple paths of the same host. So consider following use case. Google has one domain, but has many services that it offers. So for example, if you have a Google account, you can use its analytics, you can use its shopping, you have a calendar, you have a Gmail, etc. So all of these are separate applications that are accessible with the same domain. So consider you have an application that does something similar. So you offer two separate applications that are part of the same ecosystem, but you still want to have them on separate URLs. So what you can do is that in rules, you can define the host, which is myapp.com. And in the path section, you can define multiple paths. So if a user wants to access your analytics application, then they have to enter myapp.com/analytics, and that will forward the request to internal analytics service and the pod. Or if they want to access the shopping application, then the URL for that will be myapp.com/shopping. So this way you can do forwarding with one ingress of the same host to multiple applications using multiple paths. Another use case is when instead of using URLs to make different applications accessible, some companies use subdomains. So instead of having myapp.com/analytics, they create a subdomain analytics.myapp.com. So if you have your application configured that way, your configuration will look like this. So instead of having one host, like in the previous example, and multiple paths here inside, now you have multiple hosts, where each host represents a subdomain. And inside you just have one path that, again, redirects the request to analytics service. Pretty straightforward. So now in the same request setting, you have analytics service and a pod behind it. Now the request will look like this, using the subdomain instead of path. And one final topic that I mentioned that we'll cover here is configuring TLS certificate. Till now, we've only seen Ingress configuration for HTTP requests, but it's super easy to configure HTTPS forwarding in Ingress. So the only thing that you need to do is define attribute called TLS above the rules section with host, which is the same host as right here, and the secret name, which is a reference of a secret that you have to create in a cluster that holds that TLS certificate. So the secret configuration would look like this. So the name is the reference right here, and the data or the actual contents contain TLS certificate and TLS key. If you've seen my other videos where I create different components like secret, you probably noticed the additional type attribute here. In Kubernetes, there is a specific type of a secret called TLS. So we'll have to use that type when you create a TLS secret. And there are three small notes to be made here. One is that the keys of this data have to be named exactly like that. The values are the actual file contents of the certificate or key contents and not the file path or location. So you have to put the whole content here base64 encoded. And the third one is that you have to create the secret in the same namespace as the Ingress component for it to be able to use that. Otherwise, you can't reference the secret from another namespace. And these 4 lines is all you need to configure mapping of an HTTPS request to that host to internal service. In this video, I'm going to explain all the main concepts of Helm so that you're able to use it in your own projects. Also, Helm changes a lot from version to version, so understanding the basic common principles and more importantly its use cases to when and why we use Helm will make it easier for you to use it in practice.
Okay, this is cool. I definitely need to know about Helm, so delighted. Needed to know about the certificates and also how to set up different URLs. So that's all great. How to have the different paths that your project, your application might be routing to. So with the slash and the following, the URL, the slug of the URL, which actually for what I'll be using it for, I have no idea how we're going to do that. But luckily, that's not my job. So I can just see how it's going to be implemented, understand it, and then sort of back engineer it, because actually it's a far more complex use case that I'll be using it for or having a look at how it's being used for. So anyway, we'll keep going. Fantastic. Getting loads of learning in here. Love it. Love it, love it, love it.
Topics I'm going to go through in this video are Helm and Helm charts, what they are, how to use them, and in which scenarios they're used, and also what is TLR and what part it plays in the Helm architecture. So what is Helm? Helm has a couple of main features that it's used for. The first one is as a package manager for Kubernetes. So you can think of it as apt, YAML, or homebrew for Kubernetes. So it's a convenient way for packaging collections of Kubernetes YAML files and distributing them in public and private registry. Now, these definitions may sound a bit abstract, so let's break them down with specific examples. So let's say...
Okay guys, so just that this might be helpful, if people don't know about that, because I only just found out about Yarn not too long ago. I hadn't really been using Yarn. So if you're using Angular, you use a package manager npm. If you're using React, you can use npm or Yarn. But basically you have a package.json file in some projects when you're using a what's it called? What's Angular and what's React? Framework. Sorry, the word escaped me. So when you're using certain frameworks, you can add in little bits, things that you might need. I'll just show you real quick with a package manager. So if we go to npm here, let's just pull up npm, have a quick look, and basically Helm is the same thing. It's managing the packages for your Kubernetes cluster. So it's just a way to sort of get these things all managed easier for you. So if we have a quick look at npm, hopefully this will clear it up a bit. And sure, Nana's going to go through it, so she's probably going to do a better job. I'm learning this stuff as well at the moment, so but still, just to give you a bit of an idea, because if you hadn't heard of the few package managers she called out, well then you might not know about it at all. So let's just have a look here. So basically, if we come to the npm docs, npm is the world's largest software registry. Open source developers from every continent use npm to share and borrow packages. So basically, you can come to npm to leverage other people's work. There's loads of packages in there that you can add to your own projects to do certain things, so you don't need to build out all that code in order to do it. So some examples of things that you might use for npm, so let's just search for time, right? There's loads of different packages and they all do different things. So let's just search for time and see what comes up. There'll be different packages here in order to help you manage time easier. So let's go to packages actually and search the packages to see the actual packages that come up here. So come on, I ain't got all day, innit? I'm in a rush. No, I'm not in a rush. So we'll just search for time. Like, where are the npm time packages? I'm a bit. Where have all my words gone today? Where you have no patience. I have no patience. So we'll do npm package for charts. Let's just say charts, right? So there's all these different packages. So here we go, chart.js, right? And this won't be the only one. There's another one, E2, React charts down at the bottom there. So there's loads of different packages that you can use and install where people have already done the code in order to get you charts in your JavaScript projects. So if you're using JavaScript and you want to add an easy chart, you can come in here, have a look at the packages, and it might be something that's going to help you do this quicker. So if we have a quick look at the introduction and getting started, I'll just give you a quick idea so it's clear. And this npm itself is a package manager, so it keeps track of all these packages. So here we can see, look, as soon as you add this, once you've got your Angular project or your React project set up, you have a package.json file that's automatically included in there for you when you create a React or an Angular project. If you're going to follow just the standard setup for an Angular project where you just run a command in the command line, ng new project, my project, give it a project name, just go into Angular and follow all that along. In my setting up a development environment video, I walked through a full development setup of your environment and getting an Angular project off the ground. And it was from a clean factory reset, so nothing was missed out along the way. I had a blank computer and went along the whole process, because there's certain things that, people just forget. Oh, well, I had Node installed. And then as a newbie, you come along and you don't even know how to get Node installed. That was where I was at anyway. So I did it from the very, very beginning. And you can see, and then you have your package.json, which you've set up your Angular or your React project, or, whichever JavaScript framework you might be using, or you could be doing it a different way. And then you have these packages that you can add in and just install them by a simple command in the command line, and it'll give you this extra additional functionality. So here we can see for this particular one, because I search for chart, we have the functionality to create a chart. Probably speaking way too quickly, so sorry about that. I just want to let Nana explain it properly. So basically, npm, yarn and Helm, they're all package managers. So now we'll continue on. You've a bit of an idea of what a package manager is. It's just adding functionality that other coders have already spun all that up, make it easy for you, and you just add in that package then. So that's what's going on, guys. Let's keep watching.
Deploy your application in Kubernetes cluster. And you want to deploy a lot.
Sorry guys, I went back to try and let this load a bit easier.
So it's a convenient way for packaging collections of Kubernetes YAML files.
Your head'd be wrecked, lads, wouldn't it? Look, we'll figure this out. Well, we'll just keep watching. That's what I'm gonna do. So let's keep watching.
And distributing them in public and private registry. This them down with specific examples. So let's say you have deployed your application in Kubernetes cluster, and you want to deploy Elasticsearch additionally in your cluster that your application will use to collect its logs. In order to deploy Elasticstack in your Kubernetes cluster, you would need a couple of Kubernetes components. So you would need a stateful set, which is for stateful applications to deploy Elastic Stack in your Kubernetes cluster. You would need a couple of Kubernetes components. So you would need a stateful set, which is for stateful applications like databases. You would need a config map with external configuration. You would need a secret.
Guys, that's just not really enjoyable, is it? Oh, there I am. I'm huge. Look at me now. Leanne the Giant is in the building. Lily the Giant. So, yeah, that's not really enjoyable. So I'm going to just call it a day and get back onto this tomorrow, or like continue to record and go ahead. But seeing as we're just watching this, do you know what I mean? It's not all that exciting. Hopefully you guys are still enjoying watching me, watching Nana, because this is what I'm doing for these couple of days of coding. Normally I do like to get my fingers dirty tapping away on the keyboard, obviously. You know, you learn best by doing, but I just want a brief overview of Kubernetes. So this is also fine for a few days. It's totally up to you guys what you do, in my opinion. So that's about it. So we'll call it a day. I'll say have an absolutely wonderful day with yourselves, guys, and enjoy yourselves. And thanks so much, as always, for joining me, Lilly Code. Absolute world, means the world. You know, you are the best. You're actually the best. And, you know, I've been getting a few comments on the videos and stuff, one or two, and it's just wonderful. So anybody interacting with me, like, thanks so much, and I really hope that this helps people learn. That's the end goal here. So this 100-day series is me just going along and, you know, doing what I'm doing, but also I do tutorial style videos on my channel, which is more where I'm coming at it from someone with 4 years experience, not everything, not, you know, a senior developer or anything, to come in and get to the bones of things, where all the sticking points I had, that, you know, we get through those together. Because I find watching some of the more competent programmers, they just forget loads of stuff that, like, we don't know yet, you know, like setting things up and configuring things, and just you can get lost because they just think you know loads, and actually I don't know that stuff yet, so I need someone to talk me through it. So that's the whole reason I started doing this, because I had my own head going in circles when I first started. So I'm really hoping I can help some entry-level programmers, 1 and 2 years experience, you know, and then hopefully just other people might like listening to me waffle, because I'm a big waffler. But it's my channel, so I'll waffle away, you know. There's enough people keeping things to the point, you know, either you like me or you don't. So thanks so much, guys, for coming along, and to anybody that's given me support, because it's just wonderful. And also, just a point to note, I had 100 days coding video, why you should do 100 days of code, and the waffle was intense. I just waffled on for 20 minutes. That's the honest truth. And that's the video that's getting all the views. So people must think I'm an absolute waffler now. I guess I am a bit of a waffler. Here I go waffling again. So anyway, I'm going to do a far shorter version. The tutorial should be kept quick and snappy. No messing about. You know, get to the point, tell you what you need to know, and don't be telling you about my neighbour's dog, even though I didn't do that. But, you know, I went off on many tangents, so... So, you know, I'll be doing a snappier version of why you should do 100 days of code. I've just been up to my eyeballs, and that's definitely coming out soon. And, you know, thanks so much, guys. Absolutely love yous all. Have a fantastic day. Thanks for following along. You know, yous are the best, and I hope I'm adding some value to your day. So thanks so much, guys, or just a bit of light entertainment if you're not finding it valuable. Oh, who knows, but thanks so much, guys, and have a great day. Peace.